Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this, it's already April 9th, 2018, day on our calendar, and this is Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com, and I want to talk about how the Jesuits have controlled the destiny of the U.S. And if I'd asked that question to myself 25 years ago, I would have said, boy, you're crazy. These are just good, heartwarming, loving priests who are basically good educators, and all they want is nothing but goodness for the American people. Now, maybe at the lower levels, that statement would be correct, and I can verify that because I went to school at an all-boys Catholic high school called Notre Dame. You've heard of that name before, haven't you? With the Holy Cross Fathers, and right across town was a school called Loyola, named after, of course, Ignatius Loyola, and the Jesuits were teaching there. And boy, I'll tell you, I knew a lot of kids that went to Loyola, and they had nothing but praise to say about these Jesuits. Very, very strict, but very, very intelligent. And you know what? At the lower levels, like I say, that statement's probably correct. But when you start working your way up the ladder, you start finding a lot of things that just don't make sense. And how I figured that out was I was fortunate enough to ask a lot of questions because my profession was a journalist and a print journalist. And I ended up working in Rome and learning firsthand how the hierarchy of the Jesuits over at Borgo Santo Spirito Cinque, as well as the hierarchy of the Vatican over across town there in Vatican Square, are up to a lot of things that, boy, would really shock the conscience of a lot of people. And it's quite interesting that I still keep track of things. I go, in fact, going to a reunion. Our high school football team is being placed in the Wall of Fame at Notre Dame High School. And the reason is that we played 4 years, our freshman through senior years, and we never lost a game. That's right. So that'll be a lot of fun, see a lot of old friends. And many probably don't understand, what I talk about here. And at that reunion, I'm sure there'll be some Holy Cross Fathers, and you can bet that I'm not going to bring it up at all. And the reason is, I want to enjoy myself that weekend and catch up on some old friendships. But anyway, today I thought, for those of you who are interested, I would look at how the Jesuits have controlled the destiny of the U.S. And I've done many, many shows on this topic, and I've called on many different researchers, talked to many, many different people, because I felt when I was in Italy and I found out about this stuff, you know what they say about reporters. You get your nose in too deep, and boy, you're gonna smell some really. You're gonna wish you didn't stick your nose in that deep, right? But you can't help yourself when you're in that profession, and you learn things you really don't want to know about. And I'll tell you the truth. I went to Rome not understanding one thing more than what I learned when I was in high school, and not understanding one thing how the Vatican operated. I had no idea that the Vatican Bank, was a money laundering operation. I had no idea that the hierarchy of the Vatican worked with people like Stalin and Hitler and all of these dictators around the world, including, people on the other side of the fence in democracy. I had no idea. I figured they were just a religious organization, and all of their charity groups were doing nothing but good in the world. I didn't particularly like all their, I guess you would call their traditions, and it's not unusual for a Catholic to leave Catholicism and search for something a little bit more meaningful. Because all those traditions and things like that, I thought were, oh God, I got to get away from this stuff. So, when I came to Rome, I said, well, maybe, I could even get closer to my faith by being close to the Vatican. And that was my mindset. But as the stories broke, as things came out in Italy, I happened to be there for the Vatican Bank scandal, which was huge, and that's the scandal that saw the P2 Masonic Lodge come to fame, as well as bankers getting hung under the Blackfriars Bridge, one Roberto Calvi, the head of the Bank of Ambrosiano. And the Vatican was, they were immersed in this scandal that went so deep, and that kind of opened my eyes to what they were doing. Then, of course, I was involved in a terrorist event that almost cost me my life 10 days before Ronald Reagan came to visit Rome. And so at that point, I started to say to myself, I better start figuring out what this is all about. And so I did. I began to research it, and what I found out wasn't very pleasant at all, to be honest with you. And I wish that it was different. I really remember that because I said, this is a big pill to swallow. And when I found out that the terrorist group wasn't just a front organization funded like they fund ISIS today and Al-Qaeda, etc., but they were doing regional terrorism in Italy at the time. And that bomb that blew up in the American newspaper, I was about 10 seconds away from Never Never Land. And as I did the research, I found some very interesting things about the funding of the newspaper actually being CIA money coming to the American newspaper. And then, of course, I did some digging and looked back to the formation of the CIA, Pope Pius XII, and his connections to Hitler. And it really started to shake my conscience, in a sense, to say, what was this organization all about, the one that I grew up under? And it just kept going from there, one thing after another. And, of course, the Jesuits began to play a major role in a lot of the research because they, of course, you heard a different story when you grew up as a Catholic and you learn about the Jesuits. You don't hear their real reason for being formed, and that was to kill Protestantism. And then you don't you don't learn about all of their intrigue and how they're used as spies for the American government. And all these things came out in stories that we did. And so, as I continue looking for more, I think I talked about this once before, maybe a few years ago, a couple of years ago, and there's a book called it was a book not written yet. I don't even know if it's out. It's called The Romantic Depression. And one of the titles is How the Dead Light of the Black Pope and the Jesuit Militia Distort the History of the United States of America. And so I wanted to look at that. And one of the chapters was entitled The Grand Lie. And I just read to you the opening chapter, and it starts off by saying in the early 17th century, the old world of Europe was becoming stale and very unproductive, and the workers and toilers growing uneasy with continued the monarchy rule that favored the ruling elite, just like it does in America today. Isn't that interesting? Under the guise of course, democracy. And did little, or if anything, useful for the working class. And that's about the way it is today here, correct? And poor, which were difficult to manipulate and control. And, recently, when I talk about America, one of the cities you've got to look at is Los Angeles. And there was recently a journalist came from England to spend a few days in Skid Row in Los Angeles. Now, I can remember my last days in L.A. were probably in the 80s, let me see. No, in the 90s. And occasionally my work took me into those poor neighborhoods. Working with law firms, we had to do investigations and things. So a lot of times I'd end up in the Skid Row area of Los Angeles. And let me tell you, there were a number of homeless people back in the 90s there. But what's going on there now is worse than what you would see in Bombay, India. And this is according to a journalist who came from England to do the research. And she spent, in fact, lived with them, the homeless in Skid Row, for about 3 or 4 days. And her reporting was unbelievable. I mean, thousands and thousands of people living without plumbing, without any type of medical care. And she said the situation was so bad that she feared that, any kind of what she feared was a plague, some type of huge bubonic plague erupting with situations like that. That's how bad the situation is in Los Angeles. Now, another person went and did a report of San Francisco, and it's just as startling. I mean, the homeless situation there is completely out of hand. And then you would ask yourself, how in the richest country supposedly in the world could allow this to continue? And it's very simple. The paragraph I read about the monarchy rule in England in the 17th century, leading to mass migrations out of Europe. The same thing. It was this monarchy rule that favored the ruling elite and did nothing useful for the working class and the poor, which were, difficult, they thought, to control and manipulate. So if you look back at the history of the French Revolution and certain things going on, the Jesuits during that 17th century were very instrumental in creating chaos. And England, at that time, appeared to be largely Protestant on the outside. But with Queen Elizabeth I openly despising Catholicism and its Jesuit soldiers, the latter drove many Catholics from her shores to the New World. Now, the actual power behind the Tudor throne, the Secretary of State William Cecil, and the Stuart throne, later his Prime Minister's son Robert Cecil, didn't care one way or the other what the ruling religion was, as long as their agendas were adhered to and goals met. Despite their indifference, their reigns remained anti-Catholic. But the Jesuits had long before set their sights on the New World and began designing a new form of government, one that would, on the public surface, appear to grant freedom and liberty, on paper at least, to many of its citizens, with the secret intent of creating a slave state of dutiful taxpayers and obedient workers. So just as the Jesuits, folks, one of the things you find interesting, they're very good at creating religions as well as, or infiltrating them as well as creating government, forms of government. And many don't know that if you look back to the roots of communism, they began in the 16th century in what was called the Paraguay Reductions. And the Jesuits had set their sights on Paraguay as an experimental country to bring in communism, which then was used in Russia. So in the beginning of the American experience, the Jesuits were deeply behind the American Revolution, with people like Lorenzo Ricci, the Jesuit general, one of the architects of the American Revolution, as well as one of the architects. He should be one of the top founding fathers, but like I said, the Jesuits always work behind the scenes. You never know who they are. And many don't even wear the collar, like Joseph Stalin. Okay? I'm going to give you an example. So this structuring of this way of this country built on supposed liberty and freedom for all, you ask those people in Skid Row about liberty and freedom for all in the richest country in the world. But the secret intent behind it was to use it as a guise to create some type of slave state of dutiful taxpayers and obedient workers. And that's exactly what we have. And you're not allowed anymore. You can question things, but nobody really goes outside the box to really create a better system. Now, on the surface, if the system didn't have this secret agenda, it'd be perfect. But, as you know, the elite are really all that matter in this country. Now, news of this new form of government, and rule spread across Europe like wildfire and attracted some of the brightest minds who emigrated to the New World in search of this prosperity, freedom of religion, and freedom of speech, among other promises of independence. Now, if you start looking at the Constitution of the United States, freedom of religion appears to be a great and noble cause, right? Everybody can come here and worship as you choose. But little do people understand that back when this country was formed, there wasn't freedom. Before the Constitution, there wasn't freedom of religion, because the one thing that Protestants from Europe didn't want was Jesuits and Catholics in this country. They were forbidden to hold office, and in fact would have never been able to come to this country. I think we'd have been better off, to be honest with you, if the Constitution wasn't ratified. And that was one of the major goals, so that it could open the door to the Jesuits and Catholicism, so one day they could use this guise of freedom of religion to basically take away that freedom. Meaning, if you don't worship the Pope, then you don't have the right here anymore. Now, on paper, you wouldn't think that, but that's exactly what's going on. Freedom of speech is basically the same thing. A lot of things, when you start criticizing, talking and giving facts regarding what I talk about here, in many places it's considered hate speech, and you know what that means. It means you don't have freedom of speech, and that's easy to do when you're talking about this subject, because they can automatically turn around and say, hey, we're the good people, we love God, we love this country, and listen what this person is saying. It's directed at Catholicism, at Catholics, it's hate speech. But nothing could be farther than the truth, because I've always said the one responsibility of a Catholic is to understand the hierarchy of your organization, as it is any other religion or any other country. If you live in America or any country, understand the hierarchy of your government, understand the hierarchy of the religion you were born into, at least. But underneath all this gloss, these great phrases of freedom of religion, independence, democracy, prosperity, under all this, the Jesuits operated behind the curtain, this black curtain I call it, creating a powerful and most secret dictatorship that rules much of the same even today. And those very bright immigrants soon learned the true nature of Jesuits and their actions in America. Some chose to leave and not bear the burden of clashing with this powerful society. Others chose to remain in the States, in America, and learn how to work with this new system, despotic as it was to become. And we're living in that age right now. Now, in creating the illusion of this paradise in America, which spreads all over the world, I mean, sometimes I sit back and wonder, I watch this mass migration now coming across from Central America, South America, through Mexico, and into the States, and I sit back and I go, why do they even want to go there? They don't know what they're getting into. Now, on the surface, it seems to be the best place in the world, and comparatively speaking, what the Jesuits and the ruling classes have done to Central and South America, I guess it's the better of two evils. I guess we could look at it that way. But I sometimes sit back and go, boy, I don't think these people really know how this country really operates. And why should they? They're given a bunch of lies, just like 90% of the American people. So you have to sit back and shake your head, and that's one of the reasons why learning this stuff can be quite difficult to swallow, so to speak. So when they create this illusion, this paradise, and the Jesuits, they had to establish strong government of men who were strongly opposed to this kind of monarchy rule. So on the surface they say, no, we want to see independence, freedom on every level. And they were vehemently hostile to any rule whatsoever by the Vatican and its despotic Roman Catholic Church. So the Jesuits developed various schemes to fool, entice, and coerce many future leaders of America to emigrate to the New World and help build this vision that they had, along with, you can use Lorenzo Ricci, the Jesuit general back then, the architect of the the Revolutionary War, as an example, this vision of this kind of new sham government that they were setting up here. Now, one thing I always say is go into the Congress, and when the president goes to the podium, or when the Speaker of the House goes to the podium, look behind, and on each side there are two fasci symbols, okay? And those symbols they come down from the old Roman fascist governments. Now, why in a country like this, supposedly built on freedom, would you even allow that into your most sacred hall? It shows you what they're really all about. But nobody has really eyes to see. Just like people will look at the Washington Monument and the reflecting pool that's below it and have no idea what that really means. Just as they look at the Statue of Liberty and have no idea what that really means. And the symbols are there if you take the time to research it. It's anything but freedom and democracy and a republic built on helping the working man and poor. Now, to appreciate the full picture of the Jesuits, you have to go pretty deep in this new scheme. If you had a high-value asset like the American government, which represented the world's first platform of true liberty, with democratically elected leaders and unheard-of freedoms, would you dare leave it in the hands of ordinary men to run? Those not in your complete control? Heck no. Could you actually trust anyone on that extreme level with your grand prize, America? And as we look at the situation, we always say it on this show, that to reach that goal of a one-world government and a one-world order, a new world order, America has to be toppled. Now, would anyone who had this grand scheme going back hundreds of years leave this to an ordinary man? No, that's why. When you look at all the presidents of the United States, starting there, most all have royal bloodlines. And this idea, when you're a kid, you grow up with this fantasy, anyone can become a president in America. And I say yes, anyone can become a president in America if you have the bloodline of Charlemagne. And if you start looking at the presidents, most of them come from that bloodline. Others from other high-level bloodlines, elite bloodlines, including, did anybody realize that Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are cousins? Yes, if you go back into their genealogy, you'll find out they're related. Quite interesting. But anyway, we'll be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal, and look forward to continuing this discussion. We'll continue, and I want to thank, it's from some of what I read is from the Millennial Report, done in 2016, back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet. or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Hi, Greg Anthony here from the Investigative Journal, and I've never steered you wrong before when it comes to talking about the truth regarding your political and social worlds you live in. And I don't plan on steering you wrong today when I say get involved in the hemp revolution, hemp for health and wealth. I know of some of the best hemp oils on the market. If you haven't tried them, you have to. And pay attention, they're lab tested. So contact me, Greg Anthony, at gregbeacon@gmail.com. That's Greg Beacon, G-R-E-G, like boy, E-A-C-O-N.com. And I'll hook you up with some of the best hemp products on the market. And if you want to become a sales associate and make some money selling hemp to your friends and family, do that. Contact Greg Anthony at the Investigative Journal, Greg Beacon at gmail.com, Greg Beacon at gmail.com.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This ain't happening.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour, and we're talking about how the Jesuits have controlled the destiny of the United States of America. And as I closed the first half hour, I said that they would not, this being their prized possession, they would not put it in the hands of ordinary people. They had to carefully select who was controlling this system of government. And so that's why you see most of the American presidents coming from the ruling elite class, many coming from the bloodlines of Charlemagne. And did you realize that Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were actually long-lost cousins from the same bloodline? Yep, check it out. So when you think you have elections, forget about it. Even The Simpsons, if you look back 15 years ago, told you Trump was going to be the president. So they go way, they're thinking way in advance of how to keep the ball rolling here in America, so to speak. And like I said once before, if you're ever going to get to the one world government, one world order, like they are forming right now, you have to topple America. You have to bring America to its knees. And that's what they're doing right now. That's what they're doing today, as they've done hundreds of years ago. So, as the Jesuits designed the new American government, they took took a page from the playbooks of old and set up a system built on antagonism. They divide and they conquer. And this wasn't new. They didn't invent this, but they sure have become good of controlling and manipulating, and they've certainly perfected it over the nearly 500 years they've been in power. Now, what they basically do is they take a population, slice it into two parts, control each part by pitting the two groups against each other in as many ways as possible. So members of the two parts see each other as mortal enemies. So we've talked about the Hegelian dialectic many, many times on this show. And that's really what they do. And if you look right now, they're doing it to perfection with the Trump movement and the Never Trumpers. Even look to the Vatican, and you have this outcrying now of traditional Catholics wanting to impeach the Pope, who is, by the way, a Jesuit Pope. And then you have those who are loyal supporters. So they basically divide, and then in the end, they create the synthesis they want by pitting these groups together. Here you see it all the time. Take any issue. Take war. You have anti-war, you have the warmongers. Take abortion issue. You have anti-abortionists and the right-to-lifers. And it goes on and on and on. And it has worked well in every single country the Jesuits have taken over, when they were unable to control an entire population as a whole. They have to pit certain segments of it against one another, and that's the role of these minions that work for them. So this tactic has also worked well against specific sectors of a given population. People of a particular belief, for example, that the Jesuits attempt to attract and control. They identify their targets, design and institute a new attractant, which may be a political party of some form of entertainment, hook their desired catch, and they simply pull them in. Those who comply are rewarded, dissenters are banished. Now, 50 years ago, according to the Millennial Report here, the political landscape was seen publicly as a gentleman's game. Politicians who acted and looked the part. Little rhetoric and personal attacks in the media. Few publicly leaked scandals, toned down presentations of any political affairs on TV. So if you've lived in this country for a while, I can attest that's the way politics used to be here. The 1950s and the 60s were a quieter time in politics for the American people, because the Jesuits were still building the government's infrastructure after World War II and instituting new departments to fit the prevailing climate and also to prepare for the coming ones. Television was a relatively new tool on the stage, and like the actors themselves, they were being groomed for a much grander purpose, to unleash a new propaganda machine. For now, though, it was used by button-down reporters in dark suits, no smiles, deep commanding voices who reported on serious issues like the Vietnam War, anti-war protests by college kids at home, drugs and the hippie generation, to do-nothings and misfits who smartly tuned out all the goings-on. Most Americans still could not afford a television set, so the majority turned into radio news, shows, and advertisements. At that time, America seemed perfectly content, having just two major political parties, Democrat and Republican, with a handful of minor ones that were too small and insignificant for the Jesuits to be concerned with. Jesuits felt they could control American political sentiment and action via these two main mechanisms, which had worked well for the last 50 years. But they're always looking to conquer from within, and they always rule from within. They start an organization via their faithful, controlled followers. Did anybody realize, when you start talking about the New Age movement, who was the father of the New Age movement? It was a Father Teilhard de Chardin, a Jesuit priest. And you can read his writings, and guess who was one of his, guess he was the mentor of Hillary Clinton and the Clintons. Interesting. Now, this method has worked for hundreds of years. What they do, basically, They get control followers or infiltrate an already established organization whose leadership they either install or, if already in place, control via any means necessary, including bribery, extortion, kidnapping, and murder of family members and close associates. This method has worked for hundreds of years across the world and is still in wide use today. When any important Jesuit issue is threatened, they find some clever means to convince Americans to vote in favor of their preference. Their method was deceptively simple. As stated previously, it divided a population into two main segments, two main parties, control them from within, and keep them at odds with each other by designing each with different political, social, and moral ideas. The two main parties, ideals, were thought to represent those of the American people at that time and worked well for decades until the American people began questioning their political leaders and the very system they had believed in all their lives. And then we began to see the first big cracks appear in the 1960s. Now, the Jesuits had steered American politics in any direction they chose, since they controlled the government and its puppet politicians. Eisenhower is a perfect example. They also controlled the economy and all the markets and were able to create highly effective economic depressions when they chose or according to the points and cycles of finance, thus bringing American people to their knees on a whim. Being fluid in design and movement and always evolving, these Jesuits over the years have reacted to the increased American people's distaste for either political party and so designed a third party they could use to control the new breakaway group of malcontents. In the 70s, here comes the Libertarian Party, was instituted, and as with all parties, controlled from within. While the Libertarians never posed any major threat to the Democrats or Republicans, they were successful in bringing together hundreds and hundreds of thousands of malcontents who may otherwise have somehow disrupted the political system, even at a state or local level. With so much to lose, Jesuits were not willing to leave it to chance, so they instituted that safety valve. Now, according to the Millennial Report, who I'm quoting here, again, any major political party is used by the Jesuits to control a large portion of the American population because it represents virtually every important issue affecting Americans, from political to economic to social to education to military. What this party does not control, other organizations, even non-governmental ones, like Hollywood and big entertainment, big music, big pharma, certainly do, using a billion-dollar PR machine that has made even the worst and most detrimental policies look completely disarming. So they also control those, and big entertainment, big Hollywood, big music, big pharma. And if you look back at some of the history of the Jesuits, two people I tell you to look into their past and to really research it. Look into Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart as well as Shakespeare, and you will see there's a Jesuit connection, as we've done many shows on this program. So they control that as well. And witness the tobacco industry's fight to manufacture poisonous cigarettes and cigars, the pharmaceutical industry's fight to manufacture harmful drugs, test them in the third world countries and on unsuspecting populations, then unleash them on another ignorant population, the American people. The chemical industries fight to manufacture harmful substances without regard for the safety and health of American people. Today, political landscape is far from its cousin only 50 years ago. Politicians no longer look act the part. They are cartoon characters, in a sense. Look at Trump. That's what he reminds me of. Rhetoric and personal attacks are at an all-time high and are being carried out openly in the media, where deeply personal issues are brought to the front, like so many dramas on popular soap operas and telenovelas. Scandals abound like never before and are celebrated as big events by big media and big entertainment and loving Americans. The entire political arena is a laughable circus act, carefully scripted and choreographed by multi-million-dollar production companies and PR firms that create brilliant illusions and spin. But unlike a carnival show, this one is highly effective at attracting more and more Americans to its performances and enticing them to do the bidding of the Jesuits. All one need to do is examine one of the results. Americans' public anti-political sentiment and actions are at an all-time high. So instead of bashing American politics, political parties, and candidates, Americans have pulled away to a new distraction and are now mesmerized by some dazzling form of entertainment. Hours a day, 365 days a year, all you can eat, glued to the television set, to the movie theaters. And the Jesuits have evolved as well. When politics failed to control the population, they simply designed and introduced new forms that would attract Americans and control their actions and behaviors. On the outside, the formula is simple and deadly effective on all levels. Again, one only need look at the results to affirm these points. From its inception, the American political system has been controlled and run by Jesuits. We've talked about that many times on this show. And unfortunately, it goes over the heads or through the ears of many Americans who have steered politics in any way they have wished. As Americans became more educated, they wanted to learn how to have a hand in the decisions that affected their lives, so they got involved in the process, if only at a local level. Now let's look how American presidents are really chosen. Okay? An interesting look, to say the least. How are they chosen in this country? If you listen to the news or if you read your constitutional books, you'll find that there's a popular vote, supposedly. And then, of course, we have the college, the Electoral College. And Trump won that. He lost the popular vote by 3 million, but won the presidency by winning the Electoral College of 300 and some votes this year. But let's look at really how it works. In Europe, during the inception of America, only the elite could vote. Okay? In America, nearly every man, regardless of his station, supposedly can vote, right? No, and also people even that are American citizens are voting all the time in America now, supposedly. Does it really matter? I contend no. It's a game. It's a show. These presidents are selected. Not only this, since voting for the candidates of their choice was such a novel idea, never before seen in politics anywhere in the world, many of these farmers, merchants, fishermen took a great interest in political activities in their villages, towns, and cities. These hardworking souls learned to vote for people who claimed to have similar values and morals, so those representatives would effectively stand for their own interests. It was supposedly a dream come true, wasn't it? What those good, trusting Americans did not realize then is that their representatives did not actually stand for anything other than a hook and a line to attract and reel in new recruits that were soon under the control of men thousands of miles away. In Arthur J. Wayne Lauren's new book, he wrote it in 1855, The Crisis, or The Enemies of America Unmasked, he wrote this in 1855. An American gentleman was passenger on board a merchant ship bound from London to Rio de Janeiro. There were among the passengers Englishmen, Germans, Frenchmen, Spaniards, and Portuguese, but the person we refer to was the only American. Between himself and the English gentleman, there were frequent discussions about politics to which such of the other passengers as could speak English would listen, sometimes taking part. Of course, our American was a great friend to the institutions of his country and defended Republican forms of government, freedom of speech, of press, the vote by ballot, and all other elements of popular sovereignty through thick and thin. Assailed on every side, he found his office of champion of freedom. Nothing quite for sure, though. Every calm morning and every pleasant evening witnessed a new controversy on the deck or in the cabin. But he manfully held his ground against a host of adversaries, and being fluent in speech, strong in argument, skilled in logic, and full of lively and sarcastic humor, he generally came out of the debate with honor, taking care always to terminate the action at precisely the right moment, and to quit the field with flying colors. Among the persons who listened with the greatest attention to these debates was a lean-looking old Frenchman, who always took care to be present and who showed by his look and manner that he was deeply interested in politics, although he never by any chance uttered an opinion or made a remark on any political subject in the general circle of the passengers. In point of fact, this man was a Roman Catholic priest, a Jesuit of high standing. So who was this Frenchman? Like I said, he was a Roman Catholic priest, a Jesuit of high standing, who was going to some station in South America. In obedience to an order from his superior, he was a cosmopolite gentleman. Though not much past the middle part of life, he was rather aged in appearance, in consequence of the great variety and extent of the missions which he had performed in all quarters of the world, and in every kind of climate, from Canada to Calcutta, from the breezy heights of the Andes to the unwholesome marshes of Java. By sea and by land, in season and out of season, this man had journeyed on the secret errands of his order, speaking fluently a dozen different languages, and possessing the most perfect power of dissimulation. Interesting. Okay, so we'll try to get through this. Quite an interesting little segment from this book, isn't it? Okay, so let's go. He spoke fluently a dozen different languages and possessing the most perfect power of dissimulation, as well as the most thorough devotedness he showed to his church, as those carefully trained habits of obedience which are so essential to the character of an able and faithful Jesuit. He had at length become one of the most accomplished men of his age. As he listened to the conversation of the American passenger, he could not help noticing that he was gradually making converts to Republican views. Many of these passengers, he observed, sought private interviews with the American, and by careful eavesdropping, he ascertained that their object was to ask questions about his country and gain information respecting the actual working of the American attempt at self-government. When the passage was nearly over, the Frenchman, happening to be alone with the American in a retired part of the deck, where their conversation could not be overheard, commenced a quiet chat with him. Addressing him in English, which he spoke with ease and precision, he thanked him with the apparent cordiality for the entertainment he had derived from his conversation, or rather eloquent haranguing to the other passengers during the voyage. He professed to have enjoyed their debates very greatly, and gave the American due credit for his wit, his logic, his humor, his address, and his unbounded good nature. The American was much pleased at his compliments, for he had conceived a great respect for this silent and attentive auditor, and in fact had, in his own secret mind, set him down as a hopeful convert to Americanism. He thanked him, therefore, with much feeling, for his good opinion, at the same time disclaiming any merit for success in defending a truth so evident as that which is expressed in these few words, that a nation ought to govern itself, and that by the popular vote of its own citizens. This, said the Jesuit with a quiet smile, you suppose to be the system of your country. I do not suppose it, said the American. I know it. Guess what? Now, said the Jesuit, listen to me a few moments, and I will tell you what I know. Your president is elected by the conclave of cardinals at Rome, the same who elect the Pope. Your people nominate the candidates. Our confidential agents select from the number the one whom they believe to be the most favorable to the interests of the Church. His name, with those of the other candidates, is reported to the cardinals and the Pope. When their decision is announced to the confidential friends of the Pope and the cardinals in the United States, they send forth their orders through the priests, and the whole Roman Catholic vote is thrown for the candidate who is favored by the Church. He, of course, is always elected. Your parties are so equally divided on politics that this Roman Catholic vote, which is cast on purely religious considerations, is always sufficient to turn the scale. The American looked rather blank at this announcement. Even today, folks, very few people understand that the political system is a complete sham, and that any representatives of theirs are chosen, not by them, but by people who have specific agendas to counter to their own. How this could come about? Well, big media is a megaphone of the Jesuits. It is the means of which they disseminate news to the American people, news about politics and their politicians, news about health care and their health, news about education and their children. Any news whatsoever is constructed by them, presented in a very slick production by pretty people who you can't help but ogle and drool over. Might not be too smart, but they sure look good on TV, don't they? The average American can be led about quite easily, as evidenced by the latest statistics on how often Americans watch various forms of news and especially entertainment on TV. More than 5 hours per day is the average, depending on age and ethnic group. Isn't that amazing? But that's one way they use to control it. And we got a lot more on this, but I'm running out of time. One last thing. Poor people talk about characters in TV shows, the lottery, and how to get rich quick. They do not talk about wishes and dreams, how to attain meaningful goals, how to get educated and get a good job. Poor people also gamble much more than any other economic group. They eat more junk food than any other group. They do more illegal drugs and abuse alcohol than any other group. And poor people watch more TV than any other group. Interestingly, poor people over the past 50 years have had a new neighbor introduced to their lowly society. Middle-class America, the new poor, is how I call it, here in America to stay. Because one of the goals of the Jesuit order is to get rid of the middle class. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.